This is the Sword Dagger World vs. World roaming build, and this playstyle has pretty much existed since the beginning of time, but the build has changed its shape quite a bit. So this is the current iteration of the build, and there's also a Daredevil version. So if you look at the traits here, you can change acrobatics to Daredevil and just take all the middle traits here, and that's what people are using in PvP because it's a little bit more aggressive. But in World vs. World, you're going to want the acrobatics trait line because the self-sustain and the ability to use the long-range steel port is a lot more useful when you can do so in open field. But in PvP, people are kiting on terrain a lot more because it's not as open field, it's a little bit more condensed. So yeah, the acro build is probably a little bit better in World v World, and the Daredevil is a little bit better in PvP right now. So let's go over the World v World version, which is the core acrobatics build. So in acrobatics, you'll be taking Pain and Response because it gives you a little bit more Condi Cleanse, and the other two traits are lackluster because this is a long cooldown and you already have permanent vigor without this trait. You do gain your vigor from Feline Grace and Bountiful Theft, and your vigor has increased effectiveness, which gives you a lot more dodges, a lot more sustain, and you also have Swindler's Equilibrium, which will give you a lot more power, and it will reduce the recharge of your steel whenever you evade an attack while wielding a sword. Now, this trait isn't amazing because honestly, I mean, the power is good, don't get me wrong, but the reduced recharge on steel is kind of weird because improvisation doesn't get reduced. So yeah, it's a little bit awkward if you steal and then you don't get one of your utilities back because the steal was on a lower cooldown than your improvisation internal cooldown. So yeah, it's not amazing, but the power is still good. And then Assassin's Reward is the final trait you'll be taking. And the reason why I take Assassin's Reward instead of Upper Hand is because the internal cooldown on Upper Hand is 5 seconds, which is not going to be procced off cooldown. Often you're going to be using your sword too and positioning, or even just using your dodge to get out of range to be hit, not necessarily to evade an attack. So you're not always going to be proccing this off cooldown, and while the regeneration is good, it's not insanely good compared to the healing that the Assassin's Reward will give very reliably. Yes, the initiative is pretty good, but as I said, you're not proccing it off cooldown, so it's not that much. And Assassin's Reward can be used, for example, in a situation where you have conditions on you and no one's hitting you or attacking you, so you can't proc your Upper Hand, and you can use your initiative skills for movement, which would be healing you. So it's way more reliable, and there are no situations where you feel like, oh, I should have had the other trait there. No, it's always good to have Assassin's Reward. It's just more reliable, and it gives you the sustain that you need to survive long-winded fights. Trickery, don't really need to go over this because this is the standard trickery traits that you take on every thief build. You've got the steel traits pretty much. And on Sword Dagger, it is kind of nice though that you have Bountiful Theft because you have so much boon steel that having more on it really scales well with Larcenous Strike, which we'll go over later. So in Deadly Arts, you'll be taking Mug. You just want to be landing your steel because a lot of your traits are required for you to land your steel, along with Improvisation, which is a very staple trait for any kind of thief build because it gives you so much ability to do damage and to survive, because the double stolen ability can give you like double warrior stolen ability, it can give you like double guardian stolen ability, which are very aggressive, and then it also gives you a chance to recharge one of your utility skills, which is always good because your utility skills are usually something that is versatile. Like Shadow Step can be used versatile, like you can use it aggressively or defensively. Signet of Agility can be used to support your allies, keep yourself alive, or to remove weakness so you can be aggressive. And then Roll for Initiative gives you initiative, which can be used for anything, right? So getting one of those skills back on a 20-second cooldown rather than on a 50 or 30 or 50-second cooldown is going to allow you a lot more of that versatility. So improvisation is just a really good trait. So the one trait here that may be a little bit of a question mark is Panic Strike. A lot of people like Even the Odds because it's very reliable, but Panic Strike is even more reliable, not because of the Immobilize, because that's really good when you get someone below 50% HP and then they get immobilized and you can land one of your big attacks on them and secure the kill. The reason why Panic Strike is so good is actually because it allows you to proc Lotus Poison on a Sword Dagger build. So whenever you use your Sword 2, that will immobilize the target, and Immobilize will give poison, and poison will give weakness. So it's just really good for poking people, because this is a very in and out playstyle build. You go in with your Sword 2, which is a very safe skill because you can port in and then port back out. And then you have 3 seconds of them having weakness on them after you go in for you to basically attack them and not really get much counter pressure. So often what you'll do is you'll go in with Infiltrator Strike, use Cloak and Dagger, and then you'll go for a Tactical Strike. And if they try to counter pressure you during that time, they've got weakness anyways. And then after that, if you do land your combo with Cloak and Dagger and Tactical Strike, well then they're either blinded or dazed and they can't do anything after that. And then you can save your steal to kind of follow up and gain momentum, prevent them from doing more because you've got the daze from sleight of hand. It just kind of locks you down while doing constant damage, and then it can port back out and wait for the internal cooldowns and steal to come back up, and then go in and do it again. So that's kind of like the playstyle of Sword Dagger, is very in out, has a lot of poke to it, and then it can finish off targets. So those are the traits. Let's go over the gear. So the gear is mostly Marauders with pack runes. So I take all Marauders gear. Basically, I'm going to get to, when I have Fury, I have around 84%, 85% crit chance, which is a nice number to be around because you can get extra crit chance from like keep buffs or your allies. So you generally don't like to be overcapped on crit chance, so I like to go around 85 with permanent Fury usually. And the boon duration that you get from Root of the Pack, as well as the Acrobatics trait line, because you'll see here that I have extra concentration from Acrobatics, means that I have 20% boon duration, which is pretty nice. So it basically means that your Fury uptime is going to be pretty much permanent. You're going to have pretty much permanent vigor. I take a Berserker sword with the air sigil and a Berserker dagger with the fire sigil. The reason why you want air fire is just because it gives you the most poke burst. So they have an internal cooldown of 3 seconds and 5 seconds. So you go in, you proc your sigils with a crit, and then you do tons of damage and burst damage, and then you go out and then you go back in when the internal cooldown is back off, and it basically supplements your poke damage so much that you really have these really hard like bursts that you're not even investing that much into. So yeah, air fire really works out well with the Sword Dagger playstyle. And then I take a Marauder bow. You usually like Berserker weapons and then a Marauder bow because the bow is a little bit more kite potential and survivability. So you usually swap to the Shortbow to survive, and getting that extra vitality while on the bow is kind of nice, even though you can use it for damage as well. So yeah, with the Sword Dagger, you've got air, fire, and then on the bow you have energy cleansing. Then for my trinkets, I have mostly Marauders, but I take a Valkyrie backpiece and a Valkyrie amulet because, as I said earlier, you don't want to overcap on precision, and you don't really want to go Berserker either because that's still going to give you precision. And yeah, you might want a little bit more ferocity and power because that'll make your crits hit a lot harder. So I go for a Valkyrie amulet and backpiece, and then Marauder on the rest of my trinkets. The food you want to use is the bowl of sweet and spicy butternut squash soup for the power and ferocity, or you can take the ascended version, which will give you the 10% damage reduction. The skills are very simple on Sword Dagger. Your 2 skill is your main damage source because it sets up everything. So you go in with your sword 2, this will immobilize, and then when you go in, you can see a little bit of a circle on the ground. You can use your sword 2 within 15 seconds to return to that original spot. So what you want to do is use your sword 2 in a very safe location off to the side of fights. You go in and you do your damage, and then as soon as it's not safe anymore, you want to use your infiltrator return. And sometimes you want to take the return back even if it is safe to be in the fight, because later on it may not be safe, and if your infiltrator return expires, then you won't be able to replace it. So oftentimes you will be just spamming your sword 2 just to keep that safety. It's kind of like a insurance policy, really. Then you have Flanking Strike. So Flanking Strike is an evade that's unblockable, and if it lands, it will flip over to Larcenous Strike for a couple seconds, and Larcenous Strike is also unblockable, and it will steal 2 boons and deal 20% more damage if the target has no boons. So it's very good to combine Larcenous Strike with your steal, because if steal happens first, it will steal 2 boons from Bountiful Theft, and then it will steal 2 boons from the Flanking Strike. And if you steal all of their boons before the Flanking Strike lands, then you're going to be doing 20% more damage. And even if you don't steal all their boons before the Flanking Strike lands, you've stolen 4 boons. So that's a huge momentum shift either way. So Flanking Strike is something that you don't want to be spamming though, because it can often be predictable, and you lose a lot of control of your character if you are spamming it on a target. So say I jump on someone and I immediately use my Flanking Strike. Well, if they run off to this direction while I'm using the Flanking Strike, it's going to miss because I'm kind of like going off to the side. So usually you want to be using Flanking Strike on someone who is coming at you. You want to be using it sort of defensively, because it's a lot easier for you to land it on someone if they're attacking you. And what I'll often do is I'll use Flanking Strike just as a dodge, and if I so happen to land the Flanking Strike and I have Larcenous Strike ready, then I'll try to make a play with my sword 2 to immobilize them, and then I'll Larcenous Strike them, right? So you can do something like this where you immobilize them and then you Larcenous Strike them while they're immobilized, or you can do like a play where you are ready to use Larcenous Strike and then you steal into Larcenous Strike. Generally, I don't like to just spam 3 like this, because usually when you land your Flanking Strike is when the enemy knows that you have your Larcenous Strike ready, and it's just easy tell for them to dodge it. Next is Dancing Dagger. This is a very good skill because it's such a low cost, and it can actually do some decent damage when it bounces like this, and it will cripple the target, and it's really your only range damage on this if you've already used your Infiltrator Strike and you don't want to return back. So if you're like high on initiative and you don't want to be using your sword 2, you're saving it for whatever reason, you do want to spam your Dancing Dagger because that'll heal you first of all, and it will also get cripple out there. And then you have Cloak and Dagger, which is actually where most of your damage comes from. You may think that it's from Flanking Strike and Larcenous Strike, but it's actually Cloak and Dagger because it does a lot of damage. First of all, it may be a little bit predictable, but it puts on 5 vulnerability, and then it allows you to use Tactical Strike, which will give 10 vulnerability. So if you land Cloak and Dagger into Tactical Strike, that's 15 vulnerability, which will increase all your skills that you do afterward by 15%, which is really strong. So here's the main combo that I use as Sword Dagger. So I'll go in, I'll use 2, 5, and then Tactical Strike, and then I'll 1 them. I'll usually do like a full auto chain, and then once they're not dazed anymore, by the way, you need to hit them from behind with Tactical Strike to get the daze, otherwise it's just a blind from in the front. But yeah, once they're dazed, you want to do your entire auto chain, and then once they start to counter attack you, you'll start using Flanking Strike as a dodge. Now you haven't used Steal yet. If they try to back off or like dodge around while you've got Larcenous Strike ready, then you can precast your Larcenous Strike into Steal, and then that's going to be a huge momentum shift. At that point, you can do your auto attack a little bit more, and then you can use your infiltrator strike to get back out and then repeat the process. So you go in sword 2, sword 5, 1, 1, 1, 3, and then maybe a little bit of kiting here, 3 steel, and then back out, and then repeat the process. That is the basic rotation, but you don't really want to do the same thing every time, so you can mix it up. So you can go in with 5 into steel, and then when they try to run away, you can use your infiltrator strike from that location to chase. And you can also do the reverse, so you can do sword 2 to enter and then steel to chase. But the sword 2 is a little bit better at finishing because the immobilize allows you to land a second attack, whereas the steel is kind of like better for comboing with other abilities because you can animation blur with the cloak and dagger usually. So landing your steel with one of your abilities like larcenous strike and cloak and dagger is super important. So that is how to get your kills, but how do you survive? Well, there is one option that you want to enable, and that is show all enemy names. What this does is in World vs. World there's a lot of neutral mobs, and you can actually sword 2 to them even though you're not in range, and you'll gain distance like that. And this is really important because this can help you to get distance when there's no one there. So I mean, there can be an NPC but not a player, and you can see them from afar if you have that enabled. If you don't have it enabled, then it's going to be harder for you to target them. Another important trick is how to use your flanking strike as an escaping or kiting tool. So basically, when you target someone with flanking strike, you'll go towards it. But if you're not targeting anything, you'll go a little bit towards the right. So I often will detarget and use flanking strike to kite away. So for example, I'm being chased by this golem right now. What I can do is I can sword 2 over here and then detarget and then sword 3, keep dodging, maybe they port on top of me, I'll sword 2 back and then sword to another mob over here, and then I'll flanking strike, do some dodges. And that's another important thing, is knowing how to roll backwards on this build, because you have roll for initiative and withdraw. You want to have your free camera enabled for that. And once you have your free camera enabled, what you want to do is you want to unlock your camera with your left click, and then you want to face your camera in the direction that you want to roll towards. And then you have your about face keybind, which you can get in here. I have it as V. So you unlock the camera with your left click, face the direction, press the about face key, and then press your roll skill, and then right click to reface the camera the way you want to be going, and then press W. So the fast way to look at that is like this, and yeah, it allows you to do a lot of kiting. So detargeting your flanking strike, rolling backwards or forwards with withdraw and roll for initiative, and then understanding how to use your sword 2 effectively is how you survive as a sword dagger thief in World War. So here's a little bit of a roaming scenario. I find a core warrior here, and I'm going to poke them a little bit to bait out some dodges, and then I land my steel, which is really important against a core warrior, to use it immediately because you want to bait out the passive stability stance because they're usually running defense straight line. And that's a really long cooldown, so getting that out of the way early is pretty nice. Generally you don't want to steal instantly like that, but because this is a warrior like that, you know, you want to just get that out early and then think about getting the kill later. I didn't have my sword 2 return for the rampage there, so I had to go in stealth just to survive with my cloak and dagger, which can be dangerous to use cloak and dagger in melee range against a warrior. And here I'm in Shortbow. So Shortbow, it's really important to know when to go into Shortbow and when to go into sword dagger. Generally your steel cooldown will kind of like dictate when you want to be in your weapon sets, because you want to be in sword dagger while your steel is up, and you want to be kiting and kind of like delaying for time for your steel cooldown, because that is your big momentum shift. So generally you want to steal, poke and stuff like that with your sword dagger, and then you want to swap to shortbow while your steel is on cooldown. So at this point I'm now in a 1v2 with the core warrior and there's like a burn guardian. I get the warrior down though because they're still low, but the guardian gives protection to the warrior and gets the revive because I didn't have any of my cooldowns to secure the kill. You want to be saving your shadow step usually, or maybe like your steel even, to get like a shadow step stomp. And in these kind of like 1v2 situations, that's really your only win condition, so you have to kind of conserve your cooldowns in a way. But now that I'm in a 1v2, it is very dangerous and I have to start kiting a lot more. So I am using the shortbow here, and the burn guardian can really kill me right now if I get hit because I have none of my cooldowns. I use the river drake here to get a little bit more distance, and they end up not chasing me, so I get a full reset, which is really good. But now they are full reset. So before I had the warrior in a 1v1, now I've got the warrior and the guardian in a 1v1 from the start now, because we've just fully reset. So it's going to be a lot harder, but I know that the guardian is probably the best target now because the warrior is a lot more tanky. Guardians are usually going to be countered by SD Thief because their Aegis gets ripped and ignored by the unblockable. So I start getting the guardian really low here, and I do have my shadow step still. So if I do get them down, I'm trying to save the shadow step there. I'm not using it to get the down, I'm using it to secure the kill. So I do get them really low here, I get them down, and I immediately go for the stomp with the shadow step, and it's not really that dangerous anymore because now it's a 1v1 because I've secured the stomp. So now I'm back in the 1v1 with the warrior, and we can kind of like redo this. I have to be careful though because I use a lot of my stun breaks just to secure the kill. So you always want to save at least one stun break, because against the warrior, if you get bull's charge, that's pretty much you're dead, right, without a stun break. So I land a really nice cloak and dagger there, and I'm just kiting with the shortbow. As you can see, my steel is coming off cooldown very soon, so I'm baiting a little bit, and I'm going to swap to sword here. I use the cloak and dagger into tactical strike, and then I follow up with the steel, and that pretty much gets rid of like half of the warrior's health right there. And I land a really good aggressive shadow step into cloak and dagger there, and now the warrior is so low that they have to play so passively, and I can pretty much just secure the kill with cluster bombs here. They are still playing very aggressively, and I use the warrior steel to prevent any like projectiles, but yeah, at this point we just finished the kill with steel, and we get to stomp with a cloak and dagger for stealth there. So that's pretty much how you play sword dagger. You want to use your sword 2 to survive and kite when you're outnumbered, and then use your basic combo with momentum, the 2-5-1 into steel 3, and that secures the kill. So if you like this kind of content, subscribe and leave a like, and I will see you guys next time.